I used to live at the House of 1,000 Stairs in Redlands, California. I lived there for about 10 years off and on with my godparents. They lived there full time. I came on the weekends and during the summer. This place is very active at night. My godsister and I would see the spirits of ghostly nuns walking down the stairs. They would stop to ring the bells in the bell towers and then evaporate into a mist. After a while, we removed the bell that connected to the stairs. There were other spirits as well. Some were pleasant, while other spirits we believed were demons. I think the scariest experience we had was one night when I was sleeping in one of the rooms. I woke up to seeing multiple green lights floating aimlessly around me before disappearing. They had to have been orbs. I remember there was a closet which was slightly open. When I looked at the closet, I noticed the head of a figure peeking out with red eyes. If you've seen the famous Amityville horror picture, that's how it looked to me, except with red eyes, of course. There are tunnels that run under the property, and rooms as well, all made out of dirt. Some of the rooms' doors have been covered over with dirt and rocks, so that you cannot get in. If you stay down there at night, you will see nuns going in and out of these rooms that have been covered over. I'm not sure what the nuns did in this house, but there are many restless spirits here. I also believe this place draws mentally unstable people to it. While we lived there, on multiple occasions, we had to call the police because people would break into the property, knocking at our door, telling us the spirits told them to come here. There are so many stories I could tell you, but it's a very unusual place after a while. My godsister and I would sleep in the game room next to our parents' room because we were too scared to stay in our room. That's about all I'm willing to share for now, but I hope you enjoyed these stories. I know that most high schools claim to be haunted, but my old alma mater has everything from restless Indian spirits, students that died on campus, as well as the spirits of some priest that passed away at the campus. Its name is Bishop Almi High School. It's located immediately next to the San Fernando Mission Cemetery, and is directly across the street from Eden Memorial Park, a cemetery for Jewish believers. To make this easier, I will list the different stories I've heard and my own limited encounters. 1. Our school's built on what used to be an old orange grove. It was also used as a burial ground for Native Americans who built the mission. Several different faculty members have heard the sounds of an old woman crying right inside our alumni hall, and one claiming to have seen her pacing back and forth. I myself went there late with 3 friends one night in an attempt to see if we could prove anything for ourselves. We heard the same crying noises and saw a brief glimpse of a black silhouette through the all-glassed walls of the building. Other faculty members have claimed to see an Indian chief in full ceremonial garb near the school's chapel and the hallways behind it. 3. Members of the water polo, swimming team, and marching band have heard a young boy crying from the old archives located underneath the buildings on the west side of campus. The water polo and swimming teams used to use the old showers that were built for the priests when the school was a seminary, and the band used to store its equipment in spare rooms down there. One story of an eyewitness who saw the spirit is one of the creepiest our school has. A few of the girls on the swim team went down to the showers after practice and found all the shower heads on and a little boy standing in the middle of the room. The boy didn't respond to any attempts at conversation. The girls left to get a coach to try and get the boy to talk. When they got back, all of the shower heads were off, and the boy was nowhere to be found. This part of the school is directly next to the graveyard. Only a chain-link fence separates the two properties. Our pool is technically rented space from the graveyard. In the new school archives, located on the second floor of the building over the old archives, there have been reported sightings of a priest in his uniform, reading or filing books. This same hallway, nicknamed the Forbidden Hallway by students, because it has all the permanent records in school's computers' mainframes and is off limits to any student without permission, was once the dorm rooms for the young priests in training when the site still served at the cemetery. A lot of men of God passed on at this location. 5. The hallway behind the school's chapel has had several sightings. The Indian chief, the little boy, and shadowy silhouette have all been seen here. The boys' bathroom is a hotspot for strange happenings late at night. I would be there late for extracurriculars or what have you, and one night when I was there, the door to this bathroom closed and opened twice. No one else was there to do this, trying to test the spirit. I said, "Is someone here?" And the stall door I was in flung open. It didn't feel like a bad spirit, but it was definitely wanting to make itself known. There are plenty of other stories at the school from all different sources. Those are just the ones I've heard the most, in my own little 2 encounters. I really hope this haunting hotspot gets a slot on this website, because I don't think spirits are going anywhere. Yes, great website. When I was a little girl about 4 or 5 years old, I remember this clearly as if it happened yesterday. I did something bad to be sent to my room as a punishment. I was laying in bed, not sleeping mind you, just laying there, looking up at the ceiling. As you may have guessed, I was bored out of my skull. Anyway, a few moments later, I looked at the head of my bed and saw 2 white heads, round-shaped, with red eyes. No teeth, or any body for that matter. They just kept staring at me. I screamed as loud as I could, and my mother came running into the room. As soon as she did, the image or ghostly figure, or whatever it was, had vanished. This house that this happened in was known to be haunted. I'm not sure by what. I asked my mother years afterwards if she had any odd experience in that house. After I told her what happened, she said yeah. When she was down in the basement doing laundry, she heard someone call her name. No one was in the house at the time. I'm not sure where I was, or my brother were at the time, but I know we didn't call her. We call her Mommy, not by her first name, as this thing did. She answered it. Now, as I recall, if something unknown calls out your name and you answer it, isn't that an invite? This house is located in Vermont on West Road in Burlington. I forget the number of the house. My mother said I was a gifted child. Gifted, meaning able to sense things, as well as sometimes able to predict the future, which I've had in the past. It's not something that happens to me all of the time. Just once in a blue moon, I'd get visions in my dreams that had come as warning signs. For example, my brother was going on spring break during the days of his high school years, driving his Jeep over to coastal beaches in Florida. I recall having a dream of him doing this and his Jeep caught fire while he was driving down the road. Odd how this dream came about. I told my brother not to go. He thought I was crazy, of course, and he didn't believe in that sort of thing, nor does my husband. Anyway, my brother called me up one day and said that his Jeep caught fire. He had a flat tire and parked on the side of the road. He wasn't going to spring break. He was just heading over to a friend's house when this happened. Come to find out, some punk started the fire to his Jeep. In 1977, my friend and I were driving on Old Pleasanton Road during the night. We were heading south when we came upon a woman wearing a black wedding dress. All she was doing was standing there, not moving an inch. We decided to pull over to see if she needed assistance, but didn't go too close, in case it could have been an ambush. No response from the woman. We didn't see that she had a vehicle anywhere around. It was beyond sketch, so we ended up not helping the woman out and continued to drive down the road. As we were driving down the road, we could have sworn we saw the lady through my rearview mirror. She was following us. The only difference was, she was not walking. She was floating towards us. This was after we had driven a mile from where we originally saw her, and there was no way she could have caught up with us in time. Within seconds, the lady disappeared, and she was nowhere in sight. We had to stop the car on the side of the road to gather ourselves, because it almost felt like something out of a movie. When I got home, I told my grandma what happened to us, and she was stunned just like I was. A week after this incident, around the same time period, I received a phone call that my friend was found murdered with a knife through his heart at the same location where we spotted the lady a week ago. My grandma told me that it could have been death coming for him. I still tremble at the thought of reliving all that happened that dark night in 1977. Great Aunt Amy. She lived in a small 2-room shack in the middle of a very remote wooded area in northern Michigan, next to her brother and his wife. I remember her writing to me in the mid-60s and telling me they had a road name and a sign now. My younger sister and I loved going there to visit. We would walk in the woods and explore an old cabin and trailer in the woods north of them. They lived very primitively, an outhouse with magazines for toilet paper, and slaughtered their own pigs and cows. There was a great green apple tree down the road, and we always stopped to get our pickings before heading home. One time, we heard a weird noise, and my mother told us to hurry up and get in the car. We had to get going. It was a bear calling for her cub, and we were downwind. Mom feared we may have been between the mother bear and her cub. Whenever we went to visit, we went to see the uncle and his wife first, then Great Aunt Amy. Although we would see her peering over the tiered kitchen curtain when we arrived, Great Aunt Amy was very short and stout, and you could just see the top of her head from the eyes up, over the lower curtain, and I'm sure she was on her tiptoes at that. But she was always so surprised to see us, and just happened to have cookies or rolls just out of the oven. The day of her funeral, the late 1970s, my sister Kathy and I got out of the back seat of the car on opposite sides. I looked at Great Aunt Amy's cabin and then looked over the top of the car at my sister. I knew she saw her too. Great Aunt Amy's little head, eyes peering up over the curtain, as she always did when we came to visit. I could almost smell those rolls baking that she just happened to be making. Recently, my sister and I took a random trip to the area and went by to see the little old cabin again. But this time, it was gone. A new home stood just to the east of its location. I was very disappointed. My sister turned to me and said, "That's alright. She's still there. Can you feel her?" I could. My father remarried 3 years ago, and when we moved into his wife's house, I began experiencing paranormal things. I've experienced things ever since I was a child. My mom and siblings were always sensitive to the paranormal. My siblings were pretty used to it, but I'd never seen anything significant until we moved into our new home. It started slowly. I couldn't sleep well at night and had been hearing bangs. I dismissed it all at first as being in new surroundings, but it continued. My sister moved in, and we began sharing stories about things we had heard in the house. They were matching up pretty well. One night I was laying in bed, and I heard hand slams against my window and slide down it. I freaked out because my window had a screen on it. So I went into my sister's room to sleep with her and kept hearing banging from my room. There was no one in there. I slept in my sister's room a couple of times before I could sleep in my room again. I began seeing black masses for brief moments after a while, and my sister had one in her room that was about 8 feet tall and human-shaped. We began doing all that we knew, which was praying. After a few years of this, I got a little used to it, but couldn't wander the halls at night without being terrified. One night, I was playing on the computer and heard a very loud bang like a door slamming, so I went to my room. I shut my door and leaned against it and heard running up and down the hallway. Things like this began happening on a regular basis, and at the time, I felt like my sister was the only one I could talk to. Then one day, something on a different level happened. I was in bed at night, and I had a bunch of glass carousels on my dresser. I'm a firm believer in 3 a.m. being the witching hour, and at that time, all my carousels went off playing music, and a couple fell off the dresser. Once again, I played and slept with the lights on. I had one final major experience before I moved out. My dad's room stayed locked during the day, so when we heard scratching on the walls, it sounded like something was scratching the walls and the ceiling. I ran to the bedroom door and it stopped, but could see a shadow moving around under the door. The scratching then continued, so I went outside. I moved and don't experience things like that anymore, but sometimes hear noises in my apartment. I just ignore it because I know my family and I are skeptical to these kinds of things. Just keep my faith and know that I know it's human in my apartment. My dad's house, I'm not so sure. This happened to my mother's uncle in the 50s. Her aunt and uncle were coming back to San Antonio, Texas, on Highway 87 when their car broke down during the night. Uncle Steve went walking during the midnight hour to get help before he told my aunt to lock all the doors. She did just that. About 3 a.m., 3 men in a car stopped to help her. They told her that they would help her, but she told them that her husband had gone to get help, and he might be coming back. So, The men told her that they will leave, and they were going to leave her some food in a brown paper bag, which they left on the hood of her car. Hours after she thought about the food in the bag, but she was too scared to get out of the car. Soon, a highway trooper arrived. She told him that her car broke, and her husband had gone and never returned. The trooper asked her if she had seen a few gentlemen in a '57 Chevy. She told him about the 3 men that stopped, and before he left, he asked her about the bag on the hood of the car. She told him that the men left her some food in case she would get hungry. The officer grabbed the bag and peeked in it, and out of the bag, her husband's head came out. She has not been the same ever since then. I live in a small town in Kansas. I've lived in several houses in this town, and in just about each house have had strange experiences. The first I can recall was in a small farmhouse in the country. My sister and I shared a room and had bunk beds. The head of the bed was the opposite of how most people would set a room up. The head of the bed was by the window, and the foot of the bed was flush to the wall. I was in the bottom bunk, and my sister in the top bunk. I recall waking up one night and looking out the window to the shed that was across from me. In the top window, the second floor, I noticed a black human figure, no discernible facial features. It had a pale yellow light glowing around it, just purely out of fear and not wanting to experience this alone. I asked my sister, who was supposedly asleep on the top bunk, if she was seeing what I was seeing, not expecting to hear her to really answer me, and she said yes. We still joke about our psychic connection. When I was in high school and living in a small town as I do, my friends and I would drive around the countryside, mostly because we heard that there was some scary haunted place outside of town, and we always liked to investigate. But one night, I was sitting in the front seat of my friend's car and noticed that there was a small boy running in the road ahead of us. It was rather late at night, at least sometime after midnight, a very strange hour for young boys to be running out in the country. I noticed that he had on a red and green striped shirt and brown pants. What was really creepy though was the way he just kept looking back at us, almost begging to be hit. I could only see this boy at the middle point of the curve in the road. Just as we were rounding the last corner, he would disappear. It would only last several seconds. I questioned whether or not I was losing my mind, or if I really saw it, because no one else did. Another story I have was when I bought the house I live in now, still the same town. I'd fallen asleep on the floor in my living room. My dog was sleeping next to me. I'm not even sure what exactly woke me up, but when I looked towards my bedroom, I could see a small girl in a white nightgown. She had blonde hair, and next to her was a white cat. I could see through them. They had a mist around them. And again, just as it registered what I was seeing, they vanished. A few months later, I was in my room, standing on the edge of my bed, which is right next to the bedroom door. I was reaching for the light fixture to change the light bulb, with my arms extended. I noticed a man, dark short hair, and in his 30s. He had dark-rimmed glasses, and he walked past me through the living room, into my room. As soon as he got past my arm, so he would be standing right in front of me, he disappeared. I've also noticed small dark figures, a possible dog, like roaming around me, when I was walking in my house at night. I always try to jump over them, thinking that it was my dog, but she was in another room when this happened. In 1978, my parents purchased a relatively new house in Niceville, Florida. The land the house had been built on had previously been a swamp that was drained to make way for the housing subdivision. Nothing bad had ever happened in the house, yet, after living in the house for a short time, we all began to notice odd things. It started the night I broke up with my fiance. My parents had got out for the evening, and I was in my bedroom crying. Suddenly, I realized I was not alone. I looked up, and I saw a woman dressed in the turn-of-the-century clothing. She had a look of extreme empathy on her face. I did a double take. Never take your eyes off of them, I've learned, and my visitor was gone. My brother brought her engagement ring into my room so that I could take it to work the next day and have it sized. When I woke up from my nap, I got the ring off the dresser and noticed that it wasn't quite right. I got on my loupe and discovered that the ring had been squashed. I took the ring to my parents and showed it to them. Dad examined the ring. As a scientist, he was a little more observant than I was. He pointed out that the ring appeared to have been squashed from the right, beside the head that held the diamond, as if it had been sitting on the rear shank of the ring, and an incredible force put on it that literally broke the head from the shank, without leaving a single scratch or gouge mark. That kind of spooked me, since I had been sleeping with the ring on the nightstand next to my head, and it had been fine prior to being placed by my bed. However, events would soon unfold that made us all realize that the house was indeed haunted by the lady, but she was a friendly ghost, provided you were nice to her family. After having moved to the house, my mom was in a terrible car accident, which almost killed her. She was in the hospital for over 6 weeks, and even after she got out, she was in and out of the hospital repeatedly. By this time, I was married and out of the house, but my middle sister's kids would stay over while my sister worked nights. My niece slept in my old room, which seemed to soon become the epicenter for activity, perhaps because of the pre-adolescent age. It started with her being awakened by the feeling that someone was sitting on the bed. She turned on the light and saw depression in the bed, as if someone were sitting there. As she watched, the depression slowly lifted out, as if the person sitting there had stood up. She was too frightened to sleep in the room after that, so her brother slept there for her. He was awakened every night by the sound of a dresser drawer being pulled out and rattled. At first he thought it was Granny, but then he turned the light on and there was no one there. The final straw for my sister's kids came when they were sleeping over one night. Mom had just been released from the hospital, yet again, and was sitting up in the den. Dad had gone to bed. Suddenly, Dad was awakened by the sound of the smoke alarms going off. He ran into the den and found Mom passed out. She had been in incredible pain since her accident and had begun stashing pills for a grand escape. That night, she had gotten so depressed that she ended up taking all the pills that she had been hoarding. There was no evidence of smoke in the house, not even Mom's usual cigarette smoke. By this time, The smoke alarms had stopped blaring their alarms, but Dad stood there, surveying the scene and thinking about how much pain Mom was in and how horrible her life had been since the accident, and even going as far as to whether it was even right for him to decide that Mom was not entitled to escape the horror her life had become. Then the smoke alarms went off again. Dad figured somebody was trying to tell him something, and he called 911. The next day, after we had all been to the hospital to make sure that Mom was going to be okay, we all gathered at my parents' house. I asked Dad why he had called the paramedics. I felt like the doctors who had saved my mom's life after the accident had not taken into consideration the lack of quality of life she would have, and I felt like Mom was entitled to a reprieve from the constant torment she was in. Dad looked at me kind of funny and explained about the smoke detectors. Then he said that when he had gotten home later that night, he had torn each of the smoke detectors apart, and there was nothing wrong with any of them, nor was there any reason they should have gone off in the first place. Once Dad told us this, we all sat there with odd looks on our faces and started talking about the lady. By this time, I'd seen her twice. My older sister had seen her once, and my skeptical scientist dad even admitted to having seen her. We began comparing notes and found us finishing each other's stories and descriptions. We had all seen the same lady dressed in the same clothing, and none of us had mentioned it to the others for fear of being ridiculed. As time went by, the lady continued to watch over her family. After my dad's death in 1998, my then husband and I were in the den of the house after we had cleaned out the possessions and cleaned the house up. I'd left a book on the counter, and X went back to get it. Our marriage was on the rocks, and he was becoming increasingly abusive to me. Something that the lady didn't seem to care for. He had always laughed at our family ghost stories, up till the day. But when he went back in the house to get my book, he came out of the house shaking and white. He had felt a cold hand brush across his face. Then, when he didn't leave fast enough, he felt the same cold hand pushing him in the back, propelling him to the door. The lady was trying to tell him that she did not appreciate the way she was treating one of her kids, nor was he welcome in her home. After that, the lady began dropping by my house. I always knew she was around because the stove timer would go off for no reason and the dresser drawers would rattle. After I left the abusive hubby and moved to the Midwest, the lady would come by and visit me there from time to time, always setting off the timer on the stove, rattling drawers, playing tricks with the blinds, anything she could do to let me know she was keeping an eye out for me. I realized that this is unusual for ghosts to leave their primary residence and to actually follow people from home to home, but I talked to some friends who all felt like the lady was probably a female ancestor who had died in childbirth, so she felt responsible for looking out for her family. After going through the family archives, we found a photo of my great-grandmother. She had died of appendicitis when she was pregnant. The baby also died. The woman in the photo looked like the lady. My sister is now living in the house. When she first moved in, she put some pots in the cabinet, then went to the bathroom for a minute. When she came back out, the pots were sitting on the floor. Earrings and rings that had been lost for years, some in different houses that we lived in, suddenly appeared on the cabinet or in my sister's jewelry box. Unseen hands frequently pull back the curtains to look outside, and my sister's dog loves to romp and play with the unseen visitor. I could go on and on about all the poltergeist activity, some that seemed to be coming from the lady, others that seemed to be coming from my deceased dad. From fax machines that go off when they aren't plugged in, my deceased dad's voice calling me to wake me up when the gas fireplace developed a leak, even luggage being set on its end. Weird stuff just follows my sister and I around. Just 2 nights ago, while laying in bed, I was awakened by the bed shaking. I sat up and looked around and found my husband sound asleep and the door securely closed against kitty visitors. I laid back down and snuggled up to my hubby, thinking that he just had a chronic jerk that shook the bed when it suddenly hit again. The whole bed kind of went womp, as if a 20-pound weight had been dropped on it. This time, I knew that there were no cats in the room, and since I'd been snuggled up to my hubby, I knew he had not jerked in his sleep. It's nice having your own guardian spirit to watch over you, but it can really interfere with your sleeping. I know that some people think that we're all nuts, or engaging in what shrinks call magical thinking, but every time I start to question my own sanity, I get another visit. It should be interesting when we move to my dad's hometown this spring. I imagine the visits will become a regular thing. Growing up in rural northern Wisconsin, there were few opportunities for earning cash, aside from service positions and agricultural work. Coming from a farm family myself, as a youth, I would hire myself out to farmers to help with the work on their respective farms, mostly crops and dairy cattle. If you never have this experience, it may come as a surprise that these farms are usually isolated and could be quite unfriendly, creepy, and sometimes dangerous. Physical injuries like losing an eye or a limb or even a life are not uncommon. This is the setting for my story. One January, I was a hired boy at a dairy farm owned by an elderly couple with whom I was acquainted with through our parish church. The farmer's house was heated by a wood furnace in the basement, where I was lodged, and among my other jobs, I had to bring in the wood and tend the fire. One day, while carrying wood down the steps, I felt pushed, which caused me to slip and fall down the stairs, landing on the concrete floor, which knocked me out temporarily. I must have been out only a minute or two, as I awoke in pain and found the wood scattered all over. The farmer was very stern, and I feared how he would react to a mess and me not being busy with the work to which I had been assigned. When he did see me, he asked where I'd been and what I had been doing, and so I explained it to him. As I suspected, he was cross with me. Later that night, over supper, he told me a story which made me rethink my staying there. He related that some time ago, his wife, although a Catholic like me, had been dabbling in the occult, things like divination, astrology, cards, etc. Odd things began happening around the farm, and it was no longer prospering. He told me that the last straw had been when he awoke to find her levitating above their bed in the middle of the night. They decided to call the parish priest. The priest, whom I will call Father X in the story, was a mature, spiritual, and virtuous man whom I knew and respected. His brother was likewise a priest and an exorcist. The couple explained what was happening on their farm and house. Father X had to get rid of the occult books and the paraphernalia, and after hearing their confession and absolving them, offered to bless and cleanse the house with a kind of minor exorcism. Before getting out his handbook of rituals and his stolen holy water, he had them close and lock the doors and windows. For some reason, he went through the residence, leading the couple in prayers and reciting the house blessing and minor prayers of exorcism, all the while sprinkling each room with holy water. When they reached the last room, which was the kitchen, Father X was finishing the prayers, and after everyone said amen, the kitchen door, which led outside, unlocked by itself, opened and then slammed shut. Father X then explained that this is why he had locked the doors previously, to make sure that by the door opening and closing by invisible force, he could tell by that sign that the spirit had really left. The farmer went on to explain that he liked the instruction that Father X had left him with, namely, that the devil is like a dog on a leash. The demons are all restrained by the power of God, he said, chained, as it were, and they cannot really hurt you directly unless you come within their reach. Occult practices, blasphemies, and even grave sins can put people in places within the perimeter of the influence of evil spirits, and so if you want to avoid being harmed by them, don't come near them any more than you would approach a vicious dog that has been chained. I asked the farmer if the basin where I was lodging was also blessed. The farmer thought for a moment and said he did not recall that it was. The door to the basement was right outside of the kitchen door. After the experience with my fall that day, and the story that the farmer told me about what had transpired, I determined that I would not stay there another week. I left and didn't return. I didn't explain why, except to say that I wanted to be closer to the parish church and I wanted to go to daily mass. I did not have my own transportation at that time, except my bicycle. The farmer was unhappy that I left, as I was hardworking and well-behaved, but for me, there were plenty of other farms where I could work that did not have such problems. Throughout my life, I'd seen and experienced a few things that I can only describe as supernatural. Everything I'm about to tell you about actually happened, and I will describe each experience as I remember them. The first thing I can remember happened whenever I was only a young boy, growing up outside a village in Northern Ireland called Besbrook. It was during the winter, because we had a heavy snowfall the previous night, and I was outside playing with my two brothers. After a while, I went inside to warm up because my hands were frozen. My mother told me to take off my boots so that I wouldn't tramp snow all over the house. I sat down at the table with a bowl of soup in front of me, and it was then that I noticed something out of the corner of my eye in the hall leading from the kitchen to the living room. I turned to see what it was, and what I saw absolutely terrified me. I saw the figure of a woman walking down the hall towards the kitchen. I just got up and ran out the door without putting on my boots and jacket into the snow, and refused to come back inside, even though my mother insisted that there was no woman in the house. Over the next number of years, nothing happened except what sounded like somebody walking around the house, even when the rest of the household was in bed or away. Everyone heard the noises, but chose to ignore them. Then one Saturday morning while I was still in bed, I was shook and awake and told to get up and come down to breakfast. Whenever I opened my eyes, there was no one in the room, so I assumed that they had already gone downstairs. While I was getting dressed, a voice was calling from downstairs for me to hurry up. When I did get down to the kitchen, there was no one around. Everyone else was still in bed. A few days after, my youngest brother claims to have saw a young boy standing in my parents' bedroom who just stood there looking at him. Shortly after this, someone unknown attacked my brother in his bed, leaving him with a black eye. The next few years were quiet, except for the noises. Nothing else that I know of has happened in that house, except for the noises. But I did tell you that I lived outside a village. The best way to get to the village is through a wooded area, and this place is a very strange place. I could distinctly remembering a moment when I had to walk through these woods to get to the village, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, I saw a circle of people in white robes just standing in a circle and holding hands. I was so scared about what was happening that I ran the other direction and no longer wanted to run through those woods ever again. I actually had a friend of mine who was walking through the woods, and he swears to this day that he saw a woman just flying from the distance from one side to the other. Looked like a witch, but she was floating, had really dark black hair, and it just looked like she faded out. These are the only things I've seen in my life, and with that last story, my friend has seen, but I've heard other stories by people I know. The shop at the bottom of the road is said to be haunted by the ghosts of the 7 British people killed there in the 80s whenever the original patrol station was blown up. I mentioned earlier, I'm from Northern Ireland. There is a high viaduct in the area, which is used as a railway line. 18 people died constructing it, 1 for each arch, and numerous others have offed themselves off of it. The stories are that at times, you can see these people, and they all look sad. There's also the blood on one wall in a friend's house, and no matter how many times it is painted over, the blood still comes through. All this is true, and has happened within a square mile of where I live. My friend from Arizona and I made our first trip to the Queen Mary together. We happened to run into a paranormal researcher when we were on a tour and decided to stay the night. We rented a room with 2 beds so the researcher could stay with us and show us around the old boat in the middle of the night when the most activity had been reported. We attempted to fall asleep around 11 p.m. I managed to sleep quite easily and wasn't scared about sleeping in one of the reported haunted rooms. About 5 minutes after I fell asleep, my friend wakes me up. The first thing I remember was hearing a staticky voice and thought it was a radio. It wasn't until she asked me if I heard the voice. That was when I realized there was no radio anywhere in my room. My instant reaction was to turn on the light and look around the room. I reached up and tried turning on the light, and nothing happened. We were really freaking out now. The light had just been on. My friend finally turned her light on, and we laid there in bed for a few more minutes, and I decided to try the light again, and this time it turned on no problem. We tried to fall asleep again because we wanted to wander around the ship at 3 a.m. to avoid security guards. As As soon as we turned off the lights and laid down, I saw my blanket pushed down and felt something on my arm. My friend also reported feeling things brush against her arm. As tired as we were, we just decided to ignore it all and go to sleep. 3 o'clock rolled around and we went to the pool room, reported to be the most paranormally active area on board. We took several pictures, and the researcher and my friend called out to the known ghosts. I didn't want to because I really felt like I was intruding. I felt sad and angry feelings throughout the whole area. I was looking around when we all heard a man moaning. My friend and I booked it back up the stairs and stood against the wall. After a few minutes, we joined the researcher again, and he continued to call out to a little girl named Jackie. I wasn't paying attention at the time, but I heard my friend gasp, and I looked over, and she asked me if I heard that. I missed it. The researcher heard it too. It was the voice of the little girl. She was singing for them. I will never forget my experiences at the Queen Mary, and actually plan on going back soon. I came aboard not believing, and left a member of a paranormal research group. One night, in October 2008, my friends Scott, Denny, and Steve and I decided we wanted to go ghost hunting. Scott was the only one who had experience with anything, and he had seen things and had things happen to him and other people in his past groups. We started off by going to Peace Church Cemetery and where the murderer Billy Cook is buried. We were equipped with a video camera, me, a digital camera, a digital voice recorder, a heavy-duty flashlight, Scott, and 2 smaller flashlights with the other 2 people. We walked around for a little bit as Scott instructed us to let our senses take hold of us and guide us as they please. If we got an impulse to do something, do it. We all had weird feelings, but eventually realized we weren't going to find anything here. We left, deciding to go somewhere that Scott had experienced before, the Waco Cemetery. Once we got there, we said our opening prayer and made our way out into the cemetery. Eventually, we split into 2 groups, me and Steve in one, Scott and Denny in the other. Steve told me to get a couple of specific things on video. He thought he had seen something he said was best described as a specter, with a head that shaped into a point and a cloaked black body. We walked around for a bit longer, and he told me he had seen it again. We walked towards the area he saw it, and didn't see anything. We met back up with Denny and Scott on the other side of the cemetery, and Scott started talking about the things that had happened to him here. He had been asking questions and talking in general, trying to pick up some EVP. He started talking about what he called the prankster that had slapped him in the face and possibly put scratches down his friend's back. We made our way back to the center of the cemetery where there were no graves, just a patch of grass. We stood around, and Steve told the other 2 about the specter he had seen and where he had seen it. Around that time, Scott said lights out. He took a couple of pictures, and the rest was silent. Then, we turned our lights back on for a few seconds before Scott repeated his order of lights out. This part gets a little blurry. I can't remember if it was before or after we turned the lights back on, but Scott is a big guy, wide and tall. He fell backwards onto Steve, who would have fallen on me had I not moved in time. He had fallen hard. He laid there and just looked confused, and his face was red. His glasses had flown off of impact of the fall. He asked where his glasses were, Then he asked, "Did I fall?" We tried to explain what happened from each of our perspectives quickly, as we were pretty freaked out, since this was our first experience. He had asked a couple more times as the rest of us came to the conclusion that he fell too hard to have just fallen from a loss of balance. I, for one, think he was pushed by some force. Anyway, we got him up to his feet. He looked around and said, "We're leaving." Scott was shaken, and that was all we needed to hear. As we walked back to our cars to say a closing prayer, Scott started coughing, which progressed into dry heaving. We had 8 Hardees before we went to the first place, so we knew that he had something to throw up. We stopped to wait for him, and after he felt better, we proceeded to walk to a space between the cars to say the prayer. Scott began, "Our Father which art in heaven." It was interrupted by more dry heaving. Steve said, "Scott, are you okay?" He nodded and said, "Hallowed be thy," and cut off to some dry heave some more. This time, it was so bad that he lost his glasses and was down on his knees coughing up something that wasn't there. He looked up, straight at me, and gave the most evil glare I've ever seen. I immediately recoiled in fear, with tears forming in my eyes. I asked Scott, "Scott, are you there?" He got over this fit eventually, as Steve said, "Hallowed by thy what? Finish the prayer, Scott. You have to finish it." Scott straightened up a little and hoarsely started to finish, "Hallowed be thy name." Again, the same occurrence had just happened, and he just kept coughing and dry heaving. At this point, Scott has regained his composure enough to finish, and says, "For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen." As we each followed with a thankful amen, he said, "Now let's get the heck out of here." I was ahead of him in parking, so I started the car and drove out of the cemetery as fast as possible. We stopped into a church parking lot up the road. Scott got out of his car, and we started talking about what just happened. He claimed to have no recollection of falling or anything after that. That's the story of what happened in Southwest Missouri on a late October night. May you form your own conclusions, and I hope you enjoyed. I've felt the presence of ghosts at some places I've been or lived at. I've never had an experience of seeing a ghost, but I can walk into a place and tell if there's a ghost there. I know if it's a male, female, or child. I've seen dark shadows, but not all have been black. Some are gray, like the color of a rat. One night, a very good friend of mine came over and we started watching a movie and eating pizza. I saw the dark outline of a male child peeking around the corner of the kitchen. I told my friend Dawn, who is very religious, and at first she didn't believe me. I kept seeing the outline of a head and shoulders peeking around the corner. Then, about 5 minutes or so later, we started hearing a scratching noise. I told Dawn that's the ghost. She said it was just a mouse. Then, I heard a loaf of bread fall on the floor. The bread is kept on the counter far back next to the microwave. I got up to investigate. The bread was lying on the floor, but had no holes in it from a mouse. I put the bread back and went back into the living room. Dawn got up to get a glass of soda, and when she went into the kitchen, she yelled. She said the loaf of bread moved across the counter and dropped on the floor at her feet. She started praying. Every time she stopped praying, you could hear scratching noises. She kept praying, and the scratching continued. Then it got quiet. We finished the movie, and as we were talking, we noticed the lid on the pizza box, which was propped up, started to slip down. Instead of just falling down, It closed. This was very slowly. Dawn said she had enough and went home. She took the pizza and box home with her. She called me later that night and said that the ghost followed her home because her bread was constantly sliding off the counter, and she actually saw the pizza lid open when it was closed in the box. She said she threw the bread and pizza box off her balcony and prayed really hard. She didn't have any more problems, and our bread stayed on our counters after that. I was at the age of 12 to 13 when my grandmother bought me a rocking chair out of what she said was a yard sale. She claimed that they were very glad to get rid of it, and she never thought to ask why. She brought it home and sat it in my room with my dolls on it. It was an antique, so I was leery about anyone sitting in it. I never experienced any weird activities in it, but my brother at the age of 9 years was sitting in the living room where he could see it and claimed to have seen it rock 3 times. It scared him to the point where he just ran outside to my grandmother, crying and screaming. I was confused, and my grandmother told me to keep it closed and keep my door shut. Later, my aunt said she went into my room to get something, and she also seen it move. I was getting mad, thinking that there was something wrong with my chair, and hid it in my closet. The last person that had seen it move was my little cousin, due to us moving to another location. She agreed to keep it in her room, where she did not stay at the time, but went in and out of there when needed. She was doing her hair in a dresser mirror when she got a glimpse of the rocker moving. Then, to her surprise and fright, a little girl appeared. She said she was very beautiful in an older clothing. She screamed and ran from the room. It took her some time to calm down to tell what happened, and there I was, ready to get rid of it also. The one thing I did find out about the chair before giving it away was that it hated men. Due to my family's curiosity, my great uncle was determined to see it and experience it sliding away from him across the room. He was nevertheless very scared and left quickly. I'm glad I gave it away and didn't think twice, but never had it do anything in front of me. I didn't experience this myself. It happened to my mother a couple of months ago, and she told me about it after it happened. What happened was, a couple of months ago, my mom was prepping for a party in our kitchen at about 9:30 p.m. Me and my brother, who were about 11 at the time, were both at the house at the time. I was upstairs, and he was in the living room. My mom told me that she was washing dishes, and that she looked up at the window in front of her, and she saw someone walk by the hallway behind her. She immediately thought that it was me, because of how tall the person was. She called out my name, and told me to do something for her. After a couple of minutes, she came to look for my brother to ask where I had went. He looked at her like she was crazy, and told her that I hadn't come downstairs for about an hour. She calmed me down noticeably scared, because she thought someone was in the house, but we couldn't find anyone. This happened more than once to my mother, but more noticeable. She was washing clothes, and had to walk through the kitchen, and saw someone poke their head out from behind the counter. She of course thought that it was either me or my brother, but when she checked, she found no one. She called me immediately and told me what had happened, and now we believe that a ghost is in the house, but it doesn't show itself regularly. 2 other things that have happened since then. One happened a couple months after that. Me and my brother had a friend over, and he had gone to the bathroom on the 2nd story of the house. No one was up there at the time, but when he came down, he said that he had seen 2 red eyes down the hall near my parents' bedroom. He immediately ran downstairs, and we told him about my mother's experiences. The other things that happen more frequently now is that our dog starts to growl at something in the hallway. She sleeps in our parents' room, and sometimes she will get up and walk around the room, and then she will stop in the doorway and growl at something in the hallway. But when we turn on the light, there will be nothing there. It has been a couple of months since anything worth reporting has happened, but we believe that it is a friendly ghost and nothing harmful will come of it. Even though I'm terrified of this kind of stuff, reading stories and watching things on TV about it is very interesting to me. I have a story to share. It's still very fresh to me, even though it has happened many years ago that it has taken place. My husband and kids laugh at me when I tell them my story, just because some of the things that went on. They find it more humorously amusing than seriously true. This story took place when I was about 5 or 6 years old, in a house we lived at, in Oregon, Ohio. I really don't even know where to begin. The house was a 2-story home that wasn't huge, but sure wasn't small. I had 2 brothers, and they shared a bedroom with me, having my own bedroom right next to theirs. In their closet was this blue plastic hanging shoe rack that was left when we moved in. It was completely empty, except for a few bouncy balls and a metal jack in some of the pockets. Every day we would check these pockets because whenever we would empty them, there was always more the next day. I never thought anything weird about that. It was cool finding things in there. My room had a door that led to the closet. I never heard anything scary in my room, but one night, my grandparents spent the night. They came from Florida and were visiting us before moving on to other relatives. In the middle of the night, everyone ran into the room because my grandpa woke up screaming. He said the cat had crawled onto the mesh part of the box spring and scared him. Everyone went back to bed, and nothing was thought of it. Months went by, and summer was here. My brothers and I used to all lay in the hallway upstairs outside our rooms, in front of a box fan my dad would put up, because it was so hot. Sometime in the middle of the night, my younger brother Mike woke up, I guess to sleep in my room, and began screaming. He said my older brother's Jake's face was on the wall scaring him. Jake had been laying in the hallway the entire time with me and Mike. Still, everyone shrugged it off like the other things that had happened and figured he was sleepwalking. I've heard things throughout the night on and off after the last incident, but the last and scariest part of the house that happened to me, and I'm not sure how much time in between this happened, is one night when I was sleeping with my cat. It was sometime in the middle of the night, and for some reason I woke up. My cat also woke up. My cat was tucked under my arm at my side, and all of a sudden, it opened its eyes wide and hissed with its hair standing up on its back. Then it darted out of my room. I didn't understand why the cat acted like this, and seconds later, at the end of my bed was this figure. It was definitely human, but was all white and misty. It had no features or limbs. The only feature I remember is seeing an O-like shaped mouth. It was just standing there, but then looked like it was moving slowly closer. I kicked my feet at it, and nothing happened. I just kicked right through it. I was scared to death and ran into my parents' room and slept there the rest of the night. I thought I heard sounds coming from the drawers in my dad's dresser the rest of the night, but never heard anything or seen anything since. My husband, like I said, finds this humorous, so last year, he bought some ball and jacks and placed them on my pillow and laughed. I would love to find out if anyone living in that house after or before me ever had any experiences like that. I always wondered why that thing would want to scare us like that. My grandfather was a member of Washington Country Golf Club in Washington County, Pennsylvania. The golf club sits on top of a hill and used to be a very old farmhouse that dates back to the 1800s. He told me stories of him along with a group of friends who spent the night at the clubhouse. Members were allowed to stay there if they wished. It was said the old farmer who lived in the house lost all of his money and the farm went under. After this all happened, the farmer then decided to end it all. My grandfather said that during the late hours of night, you can hear footsteps walking back and forth upstairs. They went upstairs, and no one was to be found. Even in the ballroom, the lights would be seen turning off and on by themselves, as doors were being opened and closed as well. I myself have been in the clubhouse, which is very old, with wooden stairs and floors. I have even seen the bar going across the staircase, where it said the farmer had done the deed. I've heard this story from other members of the club. Whether this is true for sure or not, I don't know exactly. Another story I've heard takes place in Peters Township in Washington County. I've been told by an old football coach whose family lived in the town all their life, dating back to the 1700s, I believe. He tells a story of an old haunted railroad tunnel close to Hidden Valley Road in the area. It's said that many years ago, when the railroad was a busy place, a man was hooking up two boxcars. The boxcars then rolled together, hitting the man in between the two hookups. The man was cut in half from the two boxcars, and many people say that they have walked the tunnel holding hands across the tunnel very late in the night. They said they have seen a man walking at the other end of the tunnel with an old oil lamp in his hand, swinging back and forth. They even say that a train can be heard off in the distance, but no train even came. The story has been known as Boxcar Willie. I've heard this story from many different people in the past. I've seen the tunnel myself one night with two of my friends. We held hands going across the front of the tunnel. We all then saw a very small light at the end of the tunnel. Never went to check it out, but something was there. We all saw this light. It may have been something off in the distance, but I believe it was Boxcar Willie. We all felt something very weird that night. That's why I get the feeling something was out there. My girlfriend Liz and I haven't been together for very long, but we share a passion for ghosts and hauntings. On our second date, we went to a couple sites in our county that are supposed to be haunted. The scariest one has to be the Jericho covered bridge, located in either Falston or Jarrettsville, depending on who you ask. As Liz and I drove up to the bridge, a heavy fog rolled in, almost like the ones you see in the old movies, set in places like London. This was weird, because Liz and I have been driving around the county for the last 2 hours, and we had only encountered fog in this one place. Maryland was a neutral state during the Civil War, but racism ran deep here. The Jericho covered bridge is a grim reminder of that. It is a well-known local legend that runaway slaves were hung from the rafters of the bridge and sometimes left there for days. As we drove over the bridge, we both felt a chill and a sense of terror in the air, like the bridge had been, in fact, the scene of unspeakable horror. Neither one of us really wanted to leave the safety of the vehicle to take the pictures we were so willing to take just a few minutes prior. Eventually, though, we did take the pictures, and when we got them developed, we found only 2 pictures had turned out. In the first one, you can see some kind of disturbance in the air towards the rafters, and in the second one, we can definitely see an orb in the area where just a minute before, the unidentified disturbance had manifested itself. A couple of months ago, I was living in a house with similar history as the Hanging Bridge. It was a super old Victorian style home, very big, wide and spacious, multiple rooms. A few things happened that I thought was very spooky. The first incident happened when I was sleeping with my girlfriend in bed. In one of the rooms upstairs, we had an old music box that was in the dining room. It came with the house. I was awoken by the sounds of the music box playing by itself and could see that the door was slightly opened. Needing answers, I hopped out of bed to investigate, not understanding how the music box could play by itself. Needless to say, I made a gigantic mistake. As I opened the door and faced the stairs, I saw a dark shadow move directly up the stairs and then disappear. I froze for a second, almost chickened out, but decided to go downstairs anyway. To my surprise, there was nothing there, and all was silent. The music box had stopped playing. Another time, I was standing in the kitchen with one of my friends, and we were the only two people in the house at this time. We decided to use a spirit box and play with the Ouija board to conduct a session. I was fairly convinced that there was a spirit that needed guidance and was lost. We asked the spirit box multiple questions, but at first, no response was given to us. After nearly an hour, being frustrated, we nearly gave up. That was until we asked the spirit to give us a sign that they were still there. My back started to hurt, like some kind of pressure was being applied to it. I said to the ghost, "Is that you on my back?" Now get this. The spirit box sounded like it said death on the bridge. This immediately startled us, knowing that down the road was the Hanging Bridge. We tried asking it follow-up questions after that, but the spirit didn't say anything, and just like that, the pressure on my back disappeared. I was starting to think that the ghost was trying to tell us that they were one of the ghosts that tragically passed on the bridge. The last incident happened in the kitchen. The kitchen door was slightly opened, and all of a sudden, I heard what sounded like a girl's whisper in my ear. As I looked towards the door, I saw a lady, I think, walk past the door. At first I thought it was my friend Laura, who always used to wear jeans. So I popped my head around the corner to try and scare her, but there was no one there. I wasn't scared because it was in the middle of the day. I actually found the experience quite exciting, but also unexplainable. To this day, I've always thought these incidents were all related to the Hanging Bridge. The Job Corps in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was a student there in 1973. Since then, there has been a lot of renovation on the buildings, but when I was attending the Job Corps, it was pretty much the same as it was when it was an orphanage. One night, actually at 2 a.m. in the morning, when I came back to the dorms after babysitting, I had to walk across the campus to get to my room at the far end of the campus. While walking down to my room, all was very quiet in the dorms. Out of nowhere, I hear what sounded like children laughter in the distance. It was very faint, but I could definitely hear something. Yet, through the faintness of the sound, you could still hear shouts of glee and anger, as little children would do on a playground, if that makes sense. This happened behind the little chapel that was there, but the sounds came right there from behind the old chapel, and while I looked and squinted, I didn't see anybody there. I thought to myself at the time, why would parents allow their children to play so late outside? It was cold, and it was dark. Meanwhile, my hair was standing on end, and I tested the wind to see if the noise was carried from another place. Noises can carry long distances. There was no wind at all. At the time, I didn't know that the Job Corps used to be an orphanage until the next morning, when I was talking to my friend about hearing those children. This service worker told me that she used to work there as a service worker for the orphanage. She told me the voices I heard were probably the little children that died of broken hearts while she had worked there. Her face went pale as she told me that the children she thought were treated cruelly. There are two versions of this legend that I know. It's called the Devil's Footprint. The first is about a construction worker that was aggravated with a boulder that would not budge. The man stepped on the boulder and said, "I will give my soul to the devil, this boulder will move." By the next day, the boulder had moved, and there was an imprint of a human foot and a hoof print of the devil. The man was never seen again. The other version is about a farmer that was having a terrible harvest. He then said, "I will give my soul to the devil if I had a bountiful harvest." Indeed, the farmer's harvest was bountiful, and he made plenty of money. The farmer was quite pleased with himself until the day the devil came to collect. The farmer refused to give the devil what he wanted, and a chase ensued. They ran all around the farmer's land, and the chase ended when they reached a cliff. I believe the footprints happened when they had their final fight at that cliff edge. I've heard many stories about the devil's footprint being haunted. My fiance told me about an occurrence that happened when he was there with his brothers when he was about 13. He said that his brother was contacted by a ghost, according to him, and his brother swears to this very day he was standing in front of the church doors, and being a rebellious young man that he was, he attempted to kick the doors open. At the moment his foot hit the door, it swung open and knocked him off the steps. Now, you may be thinking that there was probably someone on the other side of the door playing a prank, but keep this in mind, the doors open inward, not outward. I also know someone that was there very late at night, and she swears that she saw hooded men walking the edge of the woods. I myself had an experience of sorts. One night, a friend and I decided to go find the place. We drove and drove, and we couldn't find it. When my friend was so sure she had driven too far, she turned back. We figured we'd better wait until daylight to look for it, so we turned on the road that we thought would take us home. And what did we see? The old cemetery and that unmistakable white church. Of course, we freaked out. My friend swerved and barely escaped going off the road. By this time, we were both feeling a little unsettling feeling in our chests. Now, whether this was due to some unwelcome presence or fear, I'm not certain. I'm assuming the latter. However, needless to say, we didn't stop there that night. My name is Bobby, and I was checking out your website, and I decided I should send in my own story. We live in Grosse Pointe Shores, Michigan. This event happened on Monday, August 15th, 2005. One day, my brother named Vince was on the computer at about 4 o'clock when he heard a scream. He ran upstairs to find me and my older brother named Sam. Vince asked what was wrong, and we asked him what he was talking about, and he said he heard a woman scream, and we said nobody screamed. We were also the only ones in the house. We got scared, but eventually thought that Vince was probably hearing things and forgot about it. But a week later, me and Sam saw this website and decided to check if something was haunting our house. We checked everywhere, but found nothing. But just as we were about to give up, Sam said to me that we never checked the attic. This was the first time that anyone was up there in the attic in a very long time. We got to the attic door and opened up the hatch, and a ladder came unfolded from the top of the door. We started climbing up the ladder and got to the attic, and it was all dark. I felt the wall right behind me and found a light switch. I flipped the switch and a dim light turned on. There was this old rocking chair rocking back and forth, the one that my grandmother used to have before she died. We totally forgot that we had gotten it and threw it up in the attic. Either way, we were freaked out. After about 2 seconds, we heard a scream so loud that it knocked me backward against Sam. We climbed as fast as we could down the ladder and shut the attic door. We were so scared that we didn't tell anyone except Vince about what happened. We checked the time, and it was exactly 4:06. We now know that Vince heard the scream from the attic a week earlier. All we know about the people that lived here before us is that they were the Andersons, and that they were an old couple that lived here and raised their kids here. I don't think it was my grandma's spirit, because she was always a gentle soul and wouldn't scare us like that. Anyway, after all the kids moved out and Miss Anderson died, a short while after that, he sold his house to us about 4 years ago. I believe Miss Anderson was the one who screamed. I guess she was mad that we stole her house from her. When I was a freshman in high school, my parents moved us from the city in central New York to a big, empty house in the country. Little did we know that the house is haunted. So many things happened there that even my skeptical dad began to believe that we were sharing the house with someone or something else. My best ghost encounter occurred in the middle of the day. I walked into the bathroom and saw, from the corner of my eye, someone that I thought was my youngest sister. I said, "Hey, Lori," but she didn't answer me. Annoyed, I turned to find out what her problem was, only to realize that it wasn't her at the sink. An old woman with gray hair up in a bun, a pink flower dress, and a white apron was drying her hands. She turned to look at me, and then she disappeared. We weren't often frightened of the ghosts, and missed them when things seemed to be quiet for too long. We would lament that they didn't like us anymore. One day, I was in the house, and I went into the shower. All of a sudden, there was a huge noise. I thought a plane hit the house, or at least there was a terrible car accident outside. I jumped out, grabbed my robe, and went to investigate. I found nothing out of order at all, so I got back into the shower. Not 2 minutes later, I heard that huge noise again. I jumped out, shaking this time, and checked everywhere, but again, there was nothing to find. I decided to skip my shower. I had a ghostly nightmare about this house before even moving in. My family moved into the house, and from day one, things were creepy. People before had moved out in a hurry, and their family broke apart almost instantly in 4 months. They all spread to 4 different places. When we moved in, we all got terribly sick within the first month. My mom had a life-threatening experience. My sister ran away. All the pets in the house died mysteriously with no known cause of death. My parents divorced. All of this happened in only 4 months. I walked into the house after school one day, and I heard my name being called. I knew no one was home because none of the cars were in the driveway. The voice calling my name sounded exactly like my mother, and I looked all around for her, even though I knew that she was presently in the hospital. Within the next few days, and a few more creepy paranormal events, all 4 of us left in just as much of a hurry as the one before us, leaving most of our personal belongings. We all split, each of us in a different car, to different places away from each other and away from the house. I will never go back to see it, nor would I wish the haunting of the house on anyone else. Hello. I lived at this house from 97 to 99. It was in Atlanta. My family and many of my friends were witnesses to the occurrences. Voices, electronics malfunctioning, dark figures. It happened day and night, but mostly at night. It is an older white home near the river, and for a while, we had a rat problem. The plumbers had left a hole under the bathroom sink. The rats, who were fond of shiny objects, left 2 human molars, complete with silver fillings, on the bathroom floor on 2 separate occasions. The back of the home had a foul odor, off and on, and the crawl space had been cemented over. I'm an investigator for the state, not a hysteric. But the place made a believer out of me, my family, and half a dozen friends. My then 4-year-old son complained of the man in the mirror with a string around his neck. Voices were male and female, also a small child. I've often felt the crawl space needed to be examined, just never could figure out a way to ask the officials to do such. I truly think that there is a body or bodies under that house. Myself and a girlfriend watched as a man-shaped shadow moved across the dining room wall into the kitchen where the light turned on. Well, we're checking out, if you can get the new owner's permission. So when I was about 17, my family had just moved back to Canada from living in the USA. It was a bit sudden, and being a family of 6, it was a little bit of a scramble to find a place to house all of us before the snow hit. So, my mom and dad decided to live in an old house that my grandpa had on his property, just for the duration of the approaching winter ahead. The house was my great uncle's, and my grandpa skidded from my brother's property to his place. Now my grandpa has 2 quarter sections, and this house is tucked way back away from the main house, so the powers ran from the main house, and with it being so far away, there is no running water. This house is old, so to add to the running water, there also isn't heat, only a wood stove. Just to give you an idea of where we were living in. Me, being a 17-year-old, I often stayed in town, and didn't stay there very often. I specifically remember the first time it happened. I was in my bed. I was the only one who would stay downstairs. With the wood stove, everyone wanted to sleep upstairs since it was warmer. So I was just starting to fall asleep, and I started to feel the room get really heavy. I remember the feeling of not being alone. The doorway didn't have a door on it. It only had a beaded curtain, and I could feel it standing there. I then remember having the feeling of total fear rush over me and frozen to my core with it. Then, it moved closer, and I felt the bed move and someone crawl right beside me, not in a way that was super noticeable, but in a sneaky, slow, sloth-moving type of way. I specifically remember wanting to vomit with fear. Then, I felt it, the feeling of an unshaven face rub against mine. I scrambled out of bed, holding my blanket, and ran up the stairs to my parents' room. I was so out of my mind with fear that I couldn't even scream. I slept on the floor with my dad's side of the bed. The next morning, Mom was wondering why her 17-year-old daughter was curled up at the foot of her bed, and I told her what happened. Later that morning, we walked over to my grandpa's house to have breakfast and go chat. My mom brought up my wild story. My grandpa and grandma silently listened, as my mom was laughing at the last bit of the story. My grandparents got really serious and turned to each other. Apparently, this has been an issue in the old house, and they didn't want to tell us, hoping we didn't acknowledge it, then it wouldn't bother us. I can honestly say it didn't feel angry or upset. It just wanted to cuddle. I didn't stay there much after that. I moved in with a cousin in town. Hey Phantom, so first of all, thanks so much for tuning into another iteration of the compilations of the ghost stories. I really appreciate your viewership as always, and if you could do me a big favor, please share this video everywhere you can. It doesn't matter where on social media, just go out and share it, leave a like, and comment below, because it really does help the algorithm to put me in the recommended section and get this video out to other people as much as possible. I know a lot of YouTubers actually say this a lot, and it's really important for you guys to do it just because, you know, it does so much for me. So don't underestimate the power of that. And now that that's out of the way, you can also support me by buying some merch. You can donate to my Patreon. You can become a member of this channel with as little as $2 a month. So you can easily all do all these things. Just remember, when you join the membership, you can click on the button that says join. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, and you can go ahead and do that. But anyway, guys, sorry for plugging everything, but I'm a plug master, and that's what I'm supposed to do. Woo! We're plugging the world away with pointless promotions that obviously aren't that important. Anyway, guys, thank you so much again. You guys are awesome. We're almost at 28K, so this is why I'm pushing all this to you, because I feel like I just want to get to 28K so fast, and I know that's probably not a good idea, but you know what? It's nice to have a new milestone to hit, and we can all celebrate together. But also, I'm also going away for a couple of days, so that's why this compilation exists in the first place. And it would be nice to have that milestone be hit on my vacation. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. And that's really all I'm going to say. So good night. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. I'll come back soon.